Welcome back to Smart Life. We're glad to have you. Every day now we hear of new studies coming out in the news, but it's hard to keep up. So I've invited April Braswell in studio with me to run through a few of the latest and most interesting studies. This is going to blow your mind. April, welcome back to the show. I'm glad to have you. One of the stories that I was so fascinated to read was the story about how anesthesia can have really long-term effects on children if they have it within their first year, if they have anesthesia within their first year. I find this particularly interesting because that mama instinct thing. Of course. My son was diagnosed in utero with hydronephrosis, which is a kidney condition, and they advised surgery right upon birth. They wanted to take him away and do surgery. And I just, in my gut, could not rationalize it and refused it, and which is kind of a scary thing to do as a parent, to refuse an advised surgery by a medical professional. Exactly. He's 12, doing very well, I can report, and still hasn't had anesthesia. And now I'm thinking, thank God I didn't do that, because the long-term studies talk about if these children have anesthesia before their first year, they experience problems with short-term memory, reading comprehension, classroom learning, ability to recall details about their lives. This is really a problem, and it doesn't surprise me at all when you take this little bitty being. They're so tiny. Yeah. It just made sense to me as a mom, but now here I see it completely validated. Yes, what's so disturbing with it is exactly what you're saying. How, when you are a parent with a newborn, you're a mom, you're a dad, and you may not be, a medical specialist yourself, hearing from someone who is in such a high authority figure or position, this is a classic influence persuasion studies. Precisely. In that kind of authority position, and they're saying, oh, you've got to have this surgery. Because you're worried, of course, for the safety and will my child live if we don't have this surgery? Right. And yet, maybe it isn't absolutely required. And even the difference of they're having the surgery a year later, a few years later, for something that is not absolutely life-threatening. Right. Of course, there are life-threatening things where you just have to go do it. Right. Other than that, but it's those long-term studies where it's showing their cognitive impairment after 10 years later. Don't you think it's a case not just a couple of years? Yeah, don't you think it's a case of you have to ask the right questions? I remember saying to them, what happens if I don't have the surgery? Well, he could start having symptoms of kidney issues, and then we'd have to do surgery. I'm like, so he'd have symptoms, and then we'd have to do kidney surgeries. Would there be impairment to his kidneys? Well, I mean, if you let it go, well, I wouldn't let it go. Right. So why not just wait? It reminds me of the Gardasil argument. Go ahead and vaccinate your newborn baby for a sexually transmitted disease that they're not even capable of getting when they're newborns. The most ridiculous thing ever. And we're pumping all these vaccines and anesthesias into our kids. They're so tiny. And it just, it's gone against my grain as that maternal grain from day one or whatever that is. My husband was in full agreement with me though. Yes. So I think people just have to be very cautious, and I think people have to ask questions. Yes. What happens if I say no to this? Right. What if we say no now? What if we do this in a few years? Or even a couple of months. Exactly. The difference of doing it even, what happens if we wait a year? Right. What happens if we wait 2 or 3 years? And getting a second opinion. Yes. The difference of simply even being able to wait for your child to have anesthesia until they're a few years, 5 years old is so very different than when they're an absolute infant. Because even the study and the headline said in kids. Yeah. It's not in kids. It is in infants, and we have to be so careful as a parent. I agree. We're hearing all these things about how marijuana is the new miracle drug. It doesn't really, you can't really get addicted. Oh, the stories I hear from the advocates, because, and if parents are naive to this, they better wake up, because I'll tell you, my 18-year-old is inundated with friends that are in her age range who may be politically conservative on every other issue, but they think marijuana is the best thing to come down the pike. And I think that's largely because people gave up marijuana after the 70s, proved it a failure, and they kind of turned to alcohol, which in some ways isn't all that much better, but is still in a lot of ways better than the long-term effects. You can gauge what's happening much better than you can with something with even the PCP-laced things. Well, and it's regulated, frankly. Alcohol's regulated, and the THC coming from God knows where. Anyway, here's more evidence that this is a very bad idea. Marijuana might make you a worse driver than alcohol. I've heard just the opposite of that. So what does this new study say? So it's kind of funny when you actually are thinking, the supposition of comparing, should I be toking on three marijuana cigarettes, or do I have a giant, cocktail in my hand for driving? The study was not trying to suggest you should go do either of these. It was in particular measuring how impairing these are on us, because that shows in a very measurable way. I can't remember the abbreviation they used for the marijuana one, but its blood alcohol content is measurable.
And we know then, so it literally had to do with our ability to drive in a manner contained in our lane. And literally, as a driver impaired by alcohol a certain amount, you were swerving and moving, but you were staying within your own lane, whereas it was quite significant by a number of percentage points, not just like a half percentage point. You were much more impaired being under the influence of marijuana than you were under alcohol, which is not to be going to suggest anyone to go get drunk or go get stoned before they go do, go drive or do anything.
So there is a measurement for, so the cops can pull you over and they can test you for marijuana use.
They could theoretically. I don't know.
I don't ever hear about them doing that.
I don't, but I don't know if that kind of the machine and how they were measuring for this study, if that is something which they then readily have as a device, the way they do with the breathalyzers, if they yet have that available for our police officers, especially on the highway patrols, because that's usually where you see it.
We've always heard, another thing we've always heard, this is myth busting here today. We've always heard that if you eat breakfast, it revs up your metabolism and you're more likely to lose weight. New study says not so fast.
It does. It was interesting because I appreciated that they commented on sort of a number of variables that are going on when you're aiming to release weight like that and to lose weight. It was a 16-week study, and they compared people and their weight loss, and the folks who simply skipped breakfast, they lost about the same amount as the other people. So it wasn't that they were trying to then, thank goodness, take this study and say, great, forget it, don't go eat breakfast, don't you do that. They did still very strongly emphasize the minute you eat breakfast, you are still turning on your metabolism. So be aware of that. And can I sort of segue into the study that for breast cancer? Because it's a good segue.
Sure, yeah.
Because they talk about factors of exercise as well as the whole thing of your metabolism. So they only did a study based on losing weight, but they didn't say, when you fast like that and you're doing that, they did say, if you're fasting sort of longer term, it does a number on your metabolism. So maybe you lost weight now, but I would love to see. That's what I wondered. That was like 16 weeks. I'm like, that's a good time frame. I would love to see a year from now,
what it does,
what it did for people who are still, what their metabolism is like a year or so from now, keeping the weight off.
Right.
So the study that they had for women around breast cancer to be preventing it, they talked about a number of the factors, genetics, all these things. Losing weight, keeping your weight under control was one of their best factors for women to avoid breast cancer. And so they're saying exercising daily. What I really appreciated was that it was not just, oh great, we all have to go join the gym, we'll work out for 3 hours a day, which most of us do not have the schedule to be able to do this. 15 minutes a day walking, that even just that was a significant factor for being able to prevent breast cancer. So I was like, I love this study. That's so doable. Everyone should be able to do that.
But the protein diet is my godsend. I love red meat. And I'm a pernicious anemia, and so red meat is my best friend.
Yes.
And it says though that increases your breast cancer risk 13%. Red meat.
I did not love this study because my family, my late mother was diabetic. We have type 2 diabetes. It goes in our family. So even if we don't, none of us have it, we sort of tend towards, let me eat a fairly high protein diet. And so I eat a lot of red meat and as well as other proteins. And they did say after sort of a few paragraphs about the red meat, well, it might be, the meat that they're eating, which might be filled with the toxins or hormones and all the additives that they're putting into meat, because that's the study that I would find so much more interesting, is watching the diet of people who are eating really the grain-fed, grass-fed cows versus the ones where they're hormone-laced.
Or the people who are eating the red meat, what are they eating with it? I mean, that's the other question you really have to ask, because if you're eating that fatty food and you're eating it on a big fat hamburger bun with buttery corn and potatoes next to it, could it not be the accompanying things instead of the meat itself? You always have to ask that question.
Yes, it's the total meal should be focused on.
The total meal. One more thing I want to get to, because I thought this was so fascinating. The kindergarten classroom. We've always thought, colors, and one of my master's degrees is in counseling education, and we learned the more colorful, the more you enchant the mind of the young, child being educated. But this study says, it might actually be distracting. I'm thinking for someone with ADHD like myself, those colors are definitely distracting.
They are. And what I appreciated, because I actually, interestingly enough, have a little bit of a Montessori education background for working with kids in Christian preschool things, and they prefer some color, but where it's a much more managed room. And that was the study that they were doing.
That's so interesting, because you just say the word Montessori, and I picture like just a little more toned down. Yeah.
There's some stuff there, but it's not overdone.
It's not
what they showed was it was not just all of the posters on the wall. It was the hanging mobiles and all these things. And of course, it's going to be distracting to the child.
Squirrel, right?
I know. I was like, it's going to be distracting to the child, and that was it. They said that the rooms that had really kind of in excess of these things, it was distracting for the children.
I can see that. I can see
and
that.
April Braswell.
Thank you for being with us. You can find her on Twitter at April Braswell, aprilbraswell.net.